Hi there, hope you're well. In this video I'm going to take a look at the pros and cons of parallel guides like this versus rail squares like this. That's coming up next. And welcome back. Yes, so parallel guides versus rail squares, which is best? Well, I'm not going to tell you which is best because obviously only you can decide what's best for you. All I want to do really is go through the pros and cons of each of these guide rail accessories, if you like. So you can make an informed decision as to where to spend your hard-earned money. They do cover similar sort of ground, and I've looked at both of these products in previous videos. When I looked at the parallel guides most recently, I did mention that they make a parallel cut, not a square cut, and that caused consternation in the comments. So this is really just to clear up any questions you might have about the advantages of one over the other. Now, just in the interest of transparency, I'll be using BenchDog's products here today. Other products are available from other fine manufacturers. I'm using BenchDog's because they are the products that I have. These have been supplied for review by BenchDog's. I haven't been paid to make this video or to say nice things about these products, but I am a BenchDog's affiliate, so I will earn from qualifying sales. If you wish to purchase one of these, be sure to use the offer code 10-minute workshop at checkout for a 5% discount across the board at BenchDog's Day, and thanks so much to Ralph at BenchDog's for extending that offer. So yeah, I've talked about both of these products before, so I'm not going to spend too much time on them. I'll give you a sort of high-level overview of what a parallel guide and a rail square does, but I will spend a little bit more time on the rail square because this has changed significantly. This is the Mark II version, and the previous one that I looked at was either a Mark I or a Mark 0. So there's a few changes made to this one, particularly in how the rail attaches. But to start with, let's take a very quick look about what parallel guides can do for you. So yeah, parallel guides. Festool introduced these in around about 2013 or so as a guide rail accessory for its tracksaws. Tracksaws, plunge saws are fantastic tools for all kinds of things, but particularly for breaking down full-size sheets of MDF or plywood, and especially in a small workspace like this, because you take the saw to the work and you need far less space around the actual workpiece. Parallel guides attached to the guide rail and made it easy to make accurate, repetitive, consistent cuts that were parallel to the edge that you're referencing from. Since then, there have been many other iterations of parallel guides. I've made a couple of these myself and have shown you how to make them. But if you're using them regularly, then ones like these that attach directly to the guide rail are worth their weight. Basically, they're, at its simplest, there are a couple of metal sticks, metal extrusions with a stop attached to them, and provided you set them up correctly, then you can make repetitive, accurate cuts all day long. These ones attach to the upward facing T-slot in the standard Festool and Makita pattern guide rails. There are other BenchDog's variations that will also work with Mafel guide rails as well. Now, because these are referencing off the edge, you're making a parallel cut too. I'd always recommend cleaning up the edge first with a plunge saw, with a tracksaw, so you've got a good edge to work to. And fairly obviously, because you've got two of these on a guide rail, the further they are apart, the more accurate the cut you'll make. And because of the width of the guide rail as well, you've got a minimum width of cut of about 240 mil, a little under 10 inches. So that's something to bear in mind as well. You can't really use them for very narrow rips. Now, interestingly, I do use parallel guides in a slightly different way. It forces a slightly different workflow on me if I'm using these instead of, say, a rail square. In fact, let's have a chat about that later. Let's talk about the rail squares and see what they can do for you. So there's been some fairly rudimentary rail squares around since there were guide rails pretty much. Took a little while for these smarter machined aluminium ones to come along, and the principle is very simple. It's a nice well-machined bit of aluminium that attaches to your guide rail via the T-slot that's beneath the rib, and it just references off the edge of your workpiece and gives you a nice square edge to work to. Interestingly, Festool have never really been interested in producing one of their own. I think they've always preferred you to buy into, in every sense, the Festool MFT for your square cuts, but I think they realised the writing was on the wall, and I believe they're now licensing the TSO version of a rail square and putting their own branding on it. The BenchDog's rail square has been around for quite some time, but this is the fairly recent Mark II version, and I'm just going to do a quick comparison between the Mark I and the Mark II that I've got here. So I've been using BenchDog's rail squares since there have been BenchDog's rail squares, and they've always been very straightforward. As I said, they're a beautifully machined piece of aluminium which attaches to your guide rail, and on the originals it's simply latched into place using these two sort of thumb screws on the back here and this brass insert. On the Mark II version, all that's changed. Instead of having the brass insert with the thumb screws, you've got a solid sort of T section that's machined out of the solid billet of aluminium, and that fits snugly into the T-track beneath the rib, and this guide rail is secured by two cams that just simply push the rail against that T-section, so very secure, much quicker to put on and take off, and you get an absolutely square rail every single time. There are other subtle differences as well between the Mark I and the Mark II. For example, on the body, these fixing holes are through holes rather than blind, so that opens up all kinds of possibilities for fixing accessories to the top of the rail square, whether ones you make yourselves or future ones coming from benchdogs. And of course, benchdogs rail squares always come with a serial number which relates specifically to a certificate of squareness that all rail squares come with. Mine happens to be 89.999 degrees square, which is more than square enough for me. So originally the rail square was pitched squarely, at guys doing installs, guys working on the site, guys in the fitted furniture game, or maybe doing kitchen fits, because it's a neat all-in-one solution. But of course that was not lost on everybody else, including myself, maybe working out of a smaller workshop, or maybe working without a workshop at all. A compact all-in-one solution that gives you a nice square cut is extremely convenient and a very attractive proposition. I do know guys who use rail squares to do full-length rips and are very happy with the cut they get, although I have been advised, and I think it's something I would do myself, that it's a good idea if you're doing a full-length rip to put a clamp at the far end as well, just to make sure that that rail doesn't wander. Of course, because of the depth of the rail square itself, the body is about 150 mm or 6 inches wide. You will need a longer rail if you're doing a full-length rip. The 2400 or 8-foot rail won't work well enough because you'll run out of rail at the far end, so you need something like a 2.7 metre or 3 metre rail would be recommended. But generally speaking, they're fantastic pieces of kit and well worth having in your toolbox or arsenal. So I mentioned earlier on that I have a subtly different approach to using a set of parallel guides as I do to, say, using a rail square, for example. Let me, rather than cut up entire sheets just for the purposes of this demonstration, let me just draw it out for you quickly what I mean by that. Let's imagine that you want to make 600 by 400 millimeter blanks, sides for a cabinet, for example, and you're going to cut those out of a full sheet of board. So you've got your 8 by 4 piece of plywood or MDF here. First thing you're going to do, we're going to use parallel guides to start with. First thing we're going to do, without the parallel guides, we're just going to rip a clean edge along there, so you know that's a good datum to start with. Second thing you're going to do is you're going to use a precision triangle or a speed square or even just a plywood square to make sure you've got a nice square corner here, so that you know is a known square. Then what we're going to do, we're going to put our parallel guides on and we're going to rip 600 mil. You want to end up with 600 by 400, so whatever that is, 24 by 16 inches or thereabouts. So you're going to make a 600 mil rip straight across the board like that, and then we're going to flip it over so that you've got it this way round with a known square at this edge, and then with the parallel guides fitted you can make your 400 mil crosscuts. And I'm doing it that way around because you've got 600 mil to play with here, so you've got the furthest possible point between the two parallel guides, between the two stop blocks, so there's minimum variation in there, and that would get you a really nice solid square set of boards. If I was doing it with the rail square though, again we'd have our 2440 8x4 2440 by 1220 board. Just as before, we clean up one edge, then with a rail square we get a nice square cut in this corner. We're going to cut this to 400 mil, so we do a 400 mil rip, which is about a third of that, yeah, like so. And again we're going to flip that over. So we've got a 2440 by 400mm rip with one square edge, and then we can do 600s off that. And the reason I'm doing it that way is because with a 400mm crosscut, there's less chance of any sort of deviation off square than there is on a 600mm crosscut. It's just a subtly different way of working with it, and it's just the way that I've always done it, and it's always worked well for me if I've needed to do that kind of thing. So there we are. That's the whistle-stop tour around the parallel guides and the rail square, and I do hope this video has helped you reach some kind of conclusion in which way you'd want to jump on these. It's a tough one because they perform a similar function in many ways. They're both guide rail accessories. I think for me personally, it is purely a personal choice. I'd probably go for the rail square first, simply because the compact all-in-one nature of it appeals to me, and I also have a fantastic timber yard just 5 minutes away with a very expensive beam saw that does the vast majority of my precision board cutting, so I rarely need to break down full-size sheet goods. If that's not your situation, and I appreciate most people don't have that facility on their doorstep, then I think possibly the parallel guides might be a better bet if you regularly need to break down full-size sheets. But do bear in mind, you must have some kind of facility in place, some kind of function to be able to get a square cut, to be able to square those boards off, whether that's a rail square or just a speed square, or maybe even the Bench Dog's precision triangle to get that perfectly square cut. But I'll leave it there for this week, I think. Thank you ever so much for taking a look. Thank you as always to my amazing Patreon supporters and YouTube members whose continuous support really does help me to keep the lights on here. And it's the conversations that we have. I know I said it before, but those conversations really do help me to shape the public-facing content that I put out on my YouTube channel. So if you'd like to be part of that team, part of that conversation, then please do join in. We'd love to have you on board and taking part. There are links down below in the video description. But that's it for this one. Thanks ever so much for taking a look. I'll see you in the next one. All right, take care.